Hello and welcome back to the Western European DPC coverage of the WePlay Animajor. Today we had our first Western European team play in the upper bracket, and that was going to be Alliance playing against the very hot PSG.LGD. And heading into this match, despite the fact that Alliance had a very impressive regular season, a lot of people were favoring PSG.LGD. And I think a lot of that comes from the recency bias of being able to have seen PSG.LGD play throughout the past few days, whereas Alliance, we haven't seen them play in nearly a month. But you really can't deny that PSG.LGD has looked absolutely fantastic. They go 11-3 in the groups. They only drop games to some of the really hot teams, and overall it looks like they're really setting the pace with the meta, just like Team Nigma. Of course, the top two of the group stage are going to be the prime candidates to set a certain meta, but a lot of teams are really starting to copy what they've been doing because they've made it look so good. Just a common example is the carry axe. I personally thought that PSG.LGD was going to win this match. I didn't know if it was going to be 2-0 or 2-1. I probably would have leaned 2-0, but of course, saying that now, it just looks like I'm just saying that because it did happen. But I am able to say that I was very impressed with Alliance's performance in the first half of each of these games. After having not seen them for almost a month, it was really hard to picture them taking down this Goliath, but they actually did very well coming out of the laning stage in each of these games. However, LGD's lane pressure and map distribution and overall just ability to kite Alliance away from what they wanted to do is what won them these two games. Looking at the first game, the series to come on before this was actually Aster versus T1, and Aster ends up losing that game, and it really just looked like they were playing a draft that they would play in their DPC. It really didn't look like they were adapting to the meta that a lot of these group stage teams were setting. And so because maybe they were a bit too stubborn, T1 sees that as a vulnerability, and T1 actually adopted a lot of the metas that have developed in this tournament, and they win that series 2-0 pretty convincingly as well. That first game was a brood game, yes, but they win that second game pretty convincingly. It seemed like Alliance really fell into the trap that Aster did as well. You'd figured that throughout this past month they'd be scrimming a lot, especially since they've been in Kiev for about 2 weeks now, scrimming against a lot of teams that are playing in this exact same tournament. So you gotta imagine that a lot of teams are practicing the strategies that they're seeing on the screen. However, Alliance actually play a draft that is super similar to one of the series that they played in the regular season. In their game 1 against Tundra, they ran the exact same 3-core lineup that they did in game 1 here, where they had Nico Baby on the Slark, they had Limp on the Death Prophet, and S4 on the Centaur War Runner. Centaur War Runner being a hero we don't see very much in this tournament after the nerfs. And Slark, another weird hero that you might think would be particularly good in a tank meta because it means there's going to be long team fights and these tanky heroes that you're going to be able to hit a lot and build up a lot of stacks as a Slark. But the way that LGD really played the map, it just made it impossible for Nico Baby to ever enter fights comfortably. Whenever he entered a fight, he'd immediately have to pop his ult or his BKB or even both, and then by the time they ran out, after 4 seconds, he'd have to jump away. So yes, like I was saying, Alliance really do come away from the lanes with a lot. Nico Baby finishes the game 7-1-4, and Limp finishes the game 3-1-6. So together they had a 10-2-10 record, which you would think is really good, but they were the losing team. All it took was for them to die one time for PSG.LGD to take advantage of that. A lot of this game was PSG.LGD really just pushing lanes and maybe getting picked off here and there, but it was all to make space for Ame, who had a perfect game. He goes 5-0-7, and he had the highest net worth in the game by far. He was over 6k ahead of Nico Baby Slark by the end of the game. It got to a point that it didn't really matter how much of a lead Alliance had. They weren't able to pressure any more towers comfortably because they were playing into this Magnus who was able to skewer back or RP, so it didn't matter if you had a BKB, it didn't matter if you were Shadow Danced, he would still be able to RP skewer you. And so when they get to the point where the second Roche is spawning, they try and force the objective super hard, but PSG.LGD has this insane team fight, so it doesn't really matter that they're so far behind. They just drop an egg and an RP, and Ame goes in, he takes the Aegis, and the game is just over right there. Suddenly you're on the back foot with none of your ultimates and no BKBs, and you're being chased down by a Morphling who has had a perfect game and has highest net worth. Not only that, but you're playing against a lot of ultimates that have that high reach for when you're trying to run away. Snapfire and Puck are able to catch you no matter what. Snapfire with the Mortimer's Kisses, I mean. And Phoenix is able to close the gap insanely hard as well. He's able to just jump on you and deal an insane amount of damage throughout a short period of time. So yes, after that Roshan pit throw that Alliance had, where they're really just trying to force themselves into that objective, PSG.LGD take that game, and they made it look pretty easy. I mean, again, Ame had a perfect game. All it really took was for them to dance around the map a little bit here and there and just make space for Ame because they knew that he was going to be able to carry this game. So heading into game 2, a lot of the panel, and myself included, were thinking, you guys got to snap out of the drafts that got you so far in the DPC because the meta has shifted a lot. You know, put Nico Baby on one of the more traditional carries, put Limp on a TA, and they kind of did adjust. They picked the Faceless Void AA, which is a very common duo in this major. However, when PSG.LGD end up drafting that Undying, they pick a Kunkka and a Tiny, 2 melee strength heroes who are not able to hit the Tombstone into Undying. But even though they are miraculously come ahead in the lanes despite having super weak looking lanes, for example, Kunkka Shadow Demon against Undying and Drow, which didn't start very well for Alliance, but after Hanskin was able to somehow find multiple kills, S4 was really set up and he was finally able to do something in the lane as his Kunkka. By the time it was time to team fight, this Razor was so far ahead from his advantageous mid matchup, which was against a mid Tiny, a Tiny that has not been doing very well in this tournament at all. It seems like no matter what position it is, it doesn't really seem to perform very well. They did put it in the core position, which notably usually does better than support, and it is Limp's Tiny, but he was playing against a Razor, so his lane was next to impossible, and it just allowed Razor to get to this point where he was so tanky that they'd either have to use everything to burst him or they couldn't touch him at all. So with all that combined, by the time it was time to take the first team fight, they just had no damage. It didn't matter if they were able to burst one or two heroes because they'd have to use absolutely everything on them, and then PSG.LGD was just able to follow up with their damage from either their Drow or their Razor, whoever survived. Probably the average net worth in KDA for PSG.LGD is usually much higher on their position 1s and 2s. Notably, it's usually prioritized more when Nothing to Say is playing the Templar Assassin, which he has played a few times in this tournament. So you'll see that their average GPM in KDA and net worth are all lower than usual. However, their offlaner, Faith Beyond, as well as the two supports, did very well. So even though Ame had a pretty horrendous lane and did get picked off a few times thereafter, and Nothing to Say getting picked off a few times in team fights when they'd have to use absolutely everything on him, like I said, the other three heroes are able to clean up. The amount of times that they called a hero into an arrow and just absolutely deleted them, it just completely fell apart for Alliance. Just kind of makes you wonder, like, what were you doing for this whole downtime? You didn't really adjust to the meta all that well, and your draft doesn't really look all that smart. You had so much time to watch PSG.LGD, and yet your draft just looks super predictable and lackluster. And it's not like it was a super late game draft. It's not like it took a long time for PSG.LGD to come back. These flaws started showing their draft almost immediately. Like I said, the lane's going bad, and then all it took for a Razor was a Hood of Defiance and a Sange for him to become unkillable. So yeah, LGD moves on to play against the winner of Team Nigma versus VP. I'm watching that right now. I'm actually recording this in between game 1 and game 2. And Alliance now go to the lower bracket where they are going to be playing against Team Spirit. Lucky for them, they are the last place team to come out of the group stage, so there is that. However, that's not to say that Team Spirit is going to be an easy out. We've seen that they can take games off some of the top teams, and that they did finish second place in their region for a reason. They're a very young, very driven team, and they want to prove themselves, and so far, Alliance really hasn't shown anything to make me believe that they can get there. Again, they haven't really shown that they've grown from the time that they've been able to watch this tournament, and they just really haven't had any standout performances yet. Obviously, only 2 games is a very small sample size, but they started both of these games off with a lead, and they just weren't able to capitalize on it. So anyways, this was my quick review. I didn't bother going over any of the stats. A lot of this is just numbers. I don't really know the format I'm going to be doing for these reviews going forward. I just figured if you guys wanted to see the types of heroes in KDA and net worth that they'd all have, that you'd be able to pause the video and take a look. Again, PSG.LGD win both of these games in about 35 minutes on average each. And yes, PSG.LGD is moving on to play the winner of this series that's going on right now. Again, Nigma versus VP. And Alliance, they look to improve as they play again tomorrow. They get no time off. They play again tomorrow against Team Spirit. So yes, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys have any suggestions for how you'd like me to lay out the reviews, or what kind of stats you'd like to see that I didn't have on here, or what kind of stats that are on here that you wouldn't like to see, let me know that as well. Of course, I'm always looking for feedback, and any sort of comments or likes or subscribes will be very much appreciated. So yeah, that's going to do it for me. I'm going to have a VP Team Nigma review coming up later tonight, so don't miss that, and I will talk to you all later.